Welcome to the Chad and Chong Podcast, where we have conversations about performance, production, and everything in between. I'm Chad.
And I'm Chong.
And welcome to episode 2.
Yeah, episode 2, man.
Today we're going to be talking about, is this life for you? Should you choose a career in music production or sound? So how about we just start? How do you even get into something like this?
Well,
how did you get into something like this?
Yeah, man, like anything, it starts off as a hobby, right? I think anything does that you become passionate about. Then you start, really honing in on your craft and working at it, and you find yourself practicing daily, like you love what you're doing and you love learning, right? And that's when you identify, I'm starting to become really passionate about music, for myself, being drums, right? I identified that at a young age. My dad would be playing these salsa records at home and have these bongos and percussion. And I just man, one day I would love to play some type of drums, walk into a church, saw a live drummer, and I told my dad, I'd love to start drum lessons, and so he's like, okay. He's like, at the time, he was paying $40 a month for my brother and myself.
Wow.
Yeah, $40 for an hour at a church. My instructor, Gerson Reyes, great instructor out here in LA, and learn a little bit about drums, learn a little bit about, different rhythms and Latin rhythms specifically because, my dad wanted me, we're from Peru. So, Latin culture and salsa and festejo, music that comes from Peru is very dominant. And so he's like, try to learn as much as you can, about our culture and about, Latin music in general. So I jumped into Afro-Cuban music, Afro-Caribbean, some Afro-Brazilian stuff. And yeah, I loved it, man. I started at a young age. What about you? When did you start?
Yeah, actually, that's interesting when you were telling your story because, I probably started with piano lessons. I don't know, probably I was like 8 or 9 or 10, but it wasn't until my older sister actually brought me into a church that was CCM that had contemporary music, and actually I was fixated on the drummer. So I had been taking piano lessons for about 3 years up until that point, but I would go every week. And after a couple of weeks, I literally just turned to my dad and I said, "Hey, Dad, can you buy me a drum set?" And so we actually went to Ontario Mills. We went to Sam Ash. I bought my first drum kit, a groove percussion for all you
man, that was my first kit too.
Really?
Yeah. It was like a sparkling blue.
Mine was blue too.
Well, there you go.
I have a picture. Do you have a picture?
Yeah, I probably do. Yeah,
bro,
yeah.
That's crazy. My sizes were like 18.
Yeah.
And it was like a piccolo snare. And it came with its own
what size
cymbals.
was your tom? Like a 12?
It was it was a 10 and 12. I had 10, 12,
I didn't have a 10.
I
started off with it was like, honestly, I think it was like 2 12s.
Oh.
Yeah, it was kind of weird. I don't remember.
But it was a group percussion.
It was a group percussion kit. Yeah.
Dude, yeah. And so, and thankfully my parents just supported me. I was probably 13 at the time. I was in middle school. And what I would do is I would go every week to church with my sister, and I would literally sit by like the second row where the band was. And after each service, I would literally go home and try to remember what the drummer did. And I would just try to duplicate it at home.
Yeah.
And again, thankful, for my parents, because, man, when I look back at it now, it must have been so loud and annoying because my drum kit was in the living room. I wasn't in the garage or anything. And so that's kind of the start for me too, is actually church. And I just love the rhythms and just hearing the drums. And everywhere I go, say, even if it's at a mall and there's a live band, I just hear rhythm and I'm going over it. And I'm like, that's really cool. So, I definitely think that hearing an actual live drum kit sparked a passion that didn't know I had.
For sure.
So,
for sure.
Yeah, that was kind of my start.
Yeah. It's interesting because as a kid, you love different things. You enjoy, learning new, if you're into sports, your parents probably put you into, basketball, baseball, soccer, depending on the type of persona that you have. Like my dad tried to do that with me at a young age. He loves soccer, right? And he was like, "Hey, I want to take you guys to do some soccer lessons here at a park nearby." And I was, we were talking earlier that I grew up in Southgate, so I'd go to Southgate Park and I'd go watch, some of his friends played, and I just never really had a loving for it, but as soon as he talk about, hey, let's go, check out this artist or go to this church that's doing this music, this style of music. At the time, it was all about, my dad, with his, salsa and merengue stuff. So it's like any church that had that style of music that he grew up with, we'd try to go and see whatever artists were, playing that style of music, but a lot of these passions that I think develop, man, started at a very young age. I don't really hear too many stories of musicians these days that start, I don't know, really late. I mean, I wouldn't say really late, but I mean, what would you consider late?
I would think somewhere in college years.
Somewhere in college years, right? It's very rare that I hear about stories where people actually take it seriously. Most of the people that end up pursuing an education for music have been doing it for years already.
That's
they
true.
just want to further their careers. Expand their circles, and that's why you go to school, you learn a little bit about music theory and all that, and the connections that you get to make. Some of them lasting forever. After the fact. And so, yeah, I think it's very interesting, just thinking about just the whole age factor. It's just like, man, you started when you were young. I started when I was young. Both of us having group percussion kits. That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Hey, man.
Yeah. What's interesting, again, is you said that your dad was the one who kind of took you around. So would you say that it was definitely hearing live music was kind of what sparked it for you? Because I hear a lot of stories about, when I was young, my mom was playing Stevie Wonder record or this or that. But for you, are you saying it's more of you actually went and saw live music?
Yeah. The only time I remember seeing a live drummer was when I was about 7 years old, to be honest. My parents would always talk about, there's this salsa band, this merengue band, this band that does, this style of music or whatever. And it's a live band. It has all these members. And at that 6, at 6 years old, I didn't really understand what that meant,
Right.
until we started going to this church in Southgate. And I saw a drummer play in front of me. And I was like, oh, that's what drums sound like live, in person. And I saw his movement, and I saw like just being able to do one thing with his right hand, another with his left, something with his right limb, things like that. So I was like, that sparked an interest in me. Like, you know what, I really want to pursue this. And I remember my dad, it's not, I wouldn't consider it a threat, but what I would say is that, he's like, I'm not going to spend all this money, which $40, at the time was a lot for my family, and so, he was like, I'm not going to spend this money if you and my brother, he was taking piano lessons, are not going to take this seriously, and so he would see me in the garage, man, and I'd be practicing, the same beat over and over again. Some of the assignments that my instructor would give me, I just go over the patterns over and over again until I finally got it. One time when I was learning a Latin rhythm, it was trying to keep quarter notes on the hi-hats, right? And the kick was falling on the end of 2 and the end of 4 in cut time. So it was, I got my younger brother to come, and I'm like, dude, I cannot, my mind is not registering the pattern like I'd like it to. Can you force me to keep the quarter notes on my right hand? So what he would literally do while I'm doing the kick pattern, I'd be doing, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 3, and I'd be doing da da da. And my brother would be pushing my arm up and down until I finally felt the rhythm, and I was like, oh, this is what it's supposed to sound like. It's just those little small details that when you finally get something, it's like you become a kid again when you learn something new. It's like it brings you back to those memories,
Yeah.
So,
and it's kind of like the whole muscle memory thing.
Yeah.
Since your own muscle couldn't do it, you
Right.
actually asked your brother to do it for you.
Yeah.
Until
Help
it
me out,
became
man.
natural in you.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeffrey. By the way, a shout out to you, man.
Yeah. I guess, again, another parallel. I didn't even realize this, but, I grew up in a pretty traditional church. So, really orchestra and pipe organ and things like that. But yeah, it was my older sister who brought me to that contemporary church. But now that you talk about it, I actually remember my dad taking me to a lot of gospel churches.
What was your first gospel album?
My first gospel album?
That you remember somebody introduced you to?
Had to have been Fred Hammond.
Pages of Life?
No, it was actually from like a Wow Gospel 99 or something.
Okay, got you.
So
my first gospel album somebody introduced me to was Fred Hammond, and it was Pages, the live CD of Pages of Life with Let the Praise Begin. Marvin McQuitty, Maurice Fitzgerald, Aaron Lindsay on there. Oh man, so many incredible musicians. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that track was on Wow Gospel 99. I mean, don't fact check me, but I'm pretty sure it was. I have the CD still. It's like a green cover. But yeah, growing up in the IE Inland Empire, my dad would take me to all these churches in San Bernardino and Riverside. And, sometimes, honestly, it would just be like a drummer and an organist or not even like a full band or something. But, man, those drums would just, smack in the whole church. And, it would just get me super excited. And it just got me more pumped up to want to go back home and try to duplicate that.
Exactly.
And it's funny is that I never really took formal drum lessons. So I think it actually really trained my ear a lot.
Yeah.
To not just listen to the drums, but being exposed to like different bands, I guess you could say, just an organ and drummer or a full band or CCM to gospel. It just allowed me to really have this kind of ear training where I'm listening to everything, like parts, okay, wow, this church has a choir. This is just 2 singers. This one is, no harmonies. This one's 6-part harmony, and I think for me, that really influenced, now that I look back at it, that influenced me as a producer and just, being able to listen to a whole bunch of different parts and understanding, okay, where do I fit in as a drummer?
Right.
Understanding that I'm also like the most dynamic thing, within the band. And it's like, how do you play, appropriately for the building,
For sure.
the scenario, understanding what's happening in the audience, things like that, where now that I look back at it, I can easily talk about it and define it.
Yeah.
But as a child, I was just soaking it all in.
Yeah.
And so
That's
being
good,
exposed to that kind of thing in a live setting, I think really was a huge kind of educational thing for me that I didn't even realize until now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Identifying the journey of music is really, really hard. It's not a straight shot. It's not something that you just jump on one road and you get to the end of it, the way you planned it. Music is can be very difficult for many people. I mean, would you agree?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It's a challenging thing. It's a very fulfilling thing because you bring happiness first of all to yourself. It satisfies you in a way that you really can't explain. It's its own language, but at the same time, you also are. It's pleasing to the ears of others. When somebody hears you play, whether it's bass, guitar, or drums, you identify as like, oh, that's Chad playing. What are some things that you develop at a young age that you say, you know what, these are some musical tendencies that I have that I'm known for? Mm-hmm. Like, do you have anything that you would say, oh, like if somebody heard me play, this is the first thing they'd hear? Anything like that?
Yeah, I would say that probably started around college for me. Mm-hmm. I mean, growing up playing the drums, I was actually really into Blink-182 and punk. So I was actually, it was a weird thing now that I think about it, because I was trying to play punk style in gospel.
Wow.
And, a lot of the stuff can kind of cross over,
Sure.
16th linear kind of things. But, I think about it and I just, I wanted to just play as many fills as I could. And so I never really had the discipline of pocket and just keeping time.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, I think maybe that was probably a reason why I switched over to bass, or probably had an influence as to why I switched over in bass. But when I switched over in bass, I realized that what's kind of how my sound was developed was me listening to keyboardists. And in college, I would say there was this open mic that happened every first Saturday night of the month in downtown Riverside at Coffee Depot. And it was called the Voice Box, and I think it was just the most eye-opening thing for me. And shout out to Ken, who actually brought me along, even when I couldn't drive at the time. But I was surrounded by world-class musicians. I mean, absolutely world-class musicians, and my ear would just get used to hearing all these chords, crazy substitutions, things like that. And so I think there was one moment where the bassist couldn't make it, and Ken was literally like, "Oh, get Chad, he can play." And I'm like, I've never played any of these songs before. I'm talking Stevie, Luther Vandross, Music Soul Child, Flowetry. I mean, artists that I didn't even know existed.
Yeah.
But it was really cool because sometimes there'd be 3 keyboardists there, and they all had their parts. But because I just had the ear, I could pretty much follow anyone. And so I was, I eventually became, one of the on-call bassists there, and I just got so much experience playing there that it kind of boosted my confidence, where I knew that wherever I went, I'd be okay.
Yeah,
Because I could rely on my ear
for sure.
from all this experience and all these, different genres of music. And so I think like, one of the defining things, at least for me now as a sound, is the fact that I could kind of go in and become a chameleon.
For sure.
Because again, it started from just me hyper listening to certain things. And so, my whole goal, especially now being in the studio, is I don't technically want them to know that it's me. So I don't want them to know, oh yeah, that's Chad's signature sound. Because I want to be able to, speaking of bass, I want to be able to mimic Abe Laboriel and Sean Hurley and, even like the gospel cats like Maurice Fitzgerald and all of them, and for me, if I can do that, if they can't even identify me, then I feel like I've done my job.
That's good, man. Yeah.
Yeah. What about you?
It's weird, man. I grew up, loving Latin music. Yeah. And that's I keep going back to that, but it's just such a huge part of my life. But I remember when I was first introduced to the Fred Hammond album, and I later ended up finding out it was Marvin McQuitty on drums. I was like, I've never heard a drummer play like this. I've never heard this style of music, something new, and it's just like his pocket, his sound, his tone, his snare was tuned perfectly. At least for the album, it was like the perfect sound. That band is just incredible, in general, but just, man, Marvin just glued that whole band together. When I was learning drums, I was also learning percussion. And I remember one of my friends, a close friend of mine that I respect, he came up to me and he said, man, he's like, I'm proud of you. I'm glad you're taking music seriously. He's like, make sure, he's like, if you want to be known as a drummer, you sound like a drummer. He's like, if you want to be known as a percussionist and sound like a percussionist. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, he's like, well, percussion encompasses a lot of what the drums have to do, but they have to do more. They fill in the gaps where the drums are not playing. He's like, just know, he's like, when you're playing as a drummer, just try to hone in on that and don't overstep musically, on other people, and take their parts. It's kind of like when a bassist and a keyboard player are playing and the keyboard player is playing in the low register, he's interfering with what the bassist is doing. And so, I was like, okay, got you. And so I would work. And I remember I played my first service at church, and I would play so low. If you want to talk about dynamics, I was very timid. And I remember I wouldn't even accent or hit the downbeat with the crash. I just hit crash with no kick. And so our MD was like, hey, Kev, he's like, give her some punch, man. He's like, play strong, So it took me a while to get used to that, And then you got to learn dynamically what settings you can play at that level, what settings you got to bring it down, But when learning to identify, like, okay, what do I want to be known as? Like, my thing is always pocket. And Jeffrey Davis, man, I got to give a shout out to you. You shared something with me a couple years ago that I think identifies with me the most. And I want to be a song drummer. I want to serve the music. I always want to play what the music requires, no more, nothing less. I'm not really a soloist by any means. There are some amazing drummers these days, man, that kill it. But man, when you hear them play pocket or try to play pocket, it's just every 4 bars they got to do something. They're just very antsy. They can't. And my thing is like, I'm just gonna lay on this as long as I can until it's my time to shine, or it requires me to go to the next section, a quick little fill, things like that. But I try not to overdo too much when I am playing. So I hope that answers the question somewhat.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
So let's fast forward a little bit. So you've been doing music full time now for a couple years.
Yeah.
So what was the transition like? Was there like a defining moment where you said, oh yeah, this is my career now? Was it when you went to school, or were you still doing side jobs? Like, when was it where you said, I'm a musician, this is my profession?
Yeah, I would say school was definitely the catalyst. Like I was sharing in episode 1, Alberto Salas had given me the opportunity. He said, man, you can go and apply, get to scholarship. Possibly you won't have to pay any school fees or anything. Like we talked about, it's like 80 grand, at the time. And he's like, if you go to school, you don't know what doors you're going to open, the people that you're going to connect with, the lasting relationships you're going to be able to have after the fact. He's like, you should definitely do it because all these instructors are going to be there, and you can learn so much, and continue to learn as even when you're done with school. This is a relationship that you continue to maintain, and you want to keep having. So I'd say that started for me in college for sure, and that was 2014. So about maybe 6 years ago. But prior to that, I was already doing music. I was doing country gigs. I was doing top 40 stuff. But that was really like, okay, I'm really doing music now. There's this 6-time Grammy audio engineer in our recording sessions, Mauricio Guerrero Sr., teaching us how to record and track, and then these miking techniques and things like that. I'm like, oh shoot, like this is stuff I didn't know. you know. So when I got introduced to that and just like taking, you know, my finals and doing musicianship and learning how to play a little bit of keys and then having this do a little bit of like what do you call it? What's the term? Solfege? Is it
Solfege?
Solfege.
Yeah.
Solfege.
Solfish.
That's gonna be number one on YouTube, man.
Yeah, right.
Solfege. Yeah, and that was challenging, man. That was
Yeah.
challenging. So yeah, I'd say when I got into in college, that's when it started up. What about you?
I went to college, like a traditional university, and I dabbled with so many different majors, you know. Shout out again to my parents because they just always supported me. And especially like my mom who I got really my music side from. And, you know, I probably went through about 6 years of school, of college before I finally realized, you know what, I think I should just choose music. There was a moment where, you know, I was kind of in and out of college and, you know, again, I talked about in episode 1 how I went to LA Recording School, did an 11-month program in there. And then after that, I went back to college, you know, tried business, tried nursing, tried x-ray, tried all these different careers. And then I got a call to go on tour, and it was just a short 2-week tour. And I decided to take it right before school started. And then it got canceled. So I was like, okay, well, I'll just go into, you know, the fall semester. By the end of the fall semester, I got another call for that same tour that was now happening in the winter. And it was about a 2 or 3 month tour. So I said, you know what? Wow, like I've never had this opportunity to tour the country. So I took it. And about at the same time, I got another call for an independent artist, and we were doing fly dates on the weekends. So I was on tour and doing fly dates. And honestly, before I knew it, I was out, and I've been out for 2.5 years. So I was only going to take a 1 semester break, and I realized I was out for 2.5 years. I was paying all of my bills. I actually had a whole house to myself that I was renting that I turned into a studio.
Wow.
You know, and I realized, wow, like I think this is making it. And prior to that point, you know, and this is a great segue, talking about, you know, what does success look like and what are your goals?
Yeah.
You know, before that, you know, when I was younger, I said, oh, I definitely want to, you know, I want to do the big pop gigs. I want to play huge arenas. I want to, you know, play Staples Center and play for Beyonce and do all these things. But now that I look at it as I'm older, you know, I realized that at that time I was probably only like 21 or 22.
Yeah.
And I realized, okay, all my bills are paid and I'm actually doing what I love. I get to travel the country and I'm playing music. And I think from that point on, my idea of success kind of shifted.
Yeah, that's good.
And it was like, okay, I mean, yes, I still have those ambitions and still want to, you know, link up with great artists and play for, you know, great artists with great musicians who are a cool hang, you know. But now it's more of like, do I get to wake up every day, you know, doing what I love?
Yeah.
And to me, that's success. If I can, you know, pay my bills, if I can have a place to live and have good food to eat, you know,
that's important.
while doing music,
Yeah.
I'm extremely grateful.
Yeah.
And that's what success looks like to me. And now, you know, now that I'm a little bit older, you know, I think being able to inspire, you know, the next generation, even just on Instagram, you know, people hit me up, yo, how did you make that snare drum, you know, sound like that? And if I can just give a little tip to me, I feel
good,
like that's making it, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that definitely changed, you know. I'd say I've been doing this for now definitely over 15 years. And my idea of success and even my goals have changed. And I still have goals, but, you know, they've definitely changed over the years.
Yeah.
How would you define, you know, success and what were some of your goals and what are they now?
Yeah, man, when I was younger, it was the same thing. You know, the notion of like touring was very appealing. You know, you're seeing the world on somebody else's dime. That's very enticing.
Right.
When you are touring, when you're doing one-offs, anytime you fly out, you know, they're paying for your flight, they're paying for your hotel, they give you per diem, which, you know, is paying for your food for the day. Hopefully, yeah, exactly.
Doesn't always happen.
Yeah, that's a good point. Depends which label you're working with. So, you know, which management and all. But yeah, typically you get to see the world on somebody else's dime, which is beautiful, a beautiful thing. It really is. It's like, man, and you work. It's not like you're doing this. You got that opportunity for free. You obviously worked hard at it. they're inquiring about you to do this tour or these one-offs or play for this artist because you have a certain talent and you have a certain gift and they like the way that you sound. And that's why we're talking a little bit about identifying your sound. You know, I actually got my little dose of that, you know, a couple years ago. We toured, you know, opening up for this artist named Romeo Santos. He's originally from New York, but he's one of the biggest bachata artists in the world. You know, this guy sold out Yankee Stadium, I think, 3 nights in a row. Like, you know, massive audiences and stuff. And so we were touring at the time. The tip of the iceberg was when we finally got to do the LA Forum. It's a legendary venue, man. And the Lakers, you know, both of us are huge fans. Yeah. So I remember I was sitting there and I was like, man, there's a mob of people right in front of me, you know, and I'm like, I can barely hear. I didn't even have in-ears. I like professional. Well, you know me, man. I just got some, you know, that's another story in itself. But I had these generic in-ears. I was like, the crowd is so loud. I can't hear myself. Yeah. I could barely hear the click. So I was trying really hard to focus, you know, but I was like, man, this was a goal of mine. And I'm so glad that, you know, I got to do it, you know, but then it's like, okay, identifying that's a goal of mine. That was something that was successful if it's, you know, according to my terms. But long term, what does that look like? If you choose to make music a career, it's all about, you know, what goals you've set for yourself, what priorities you have in line, you know, but ultimately what's making you the happiest, you know, and then hopefully that's, you know, building a family, you know, if that's for you, I don't know, you know, for the audience or the people watching, you know, but for me, it's like, okay, Chad and I have been talking, like, we're both in the stages of making life moves, you know, and saving up for houses, you know, like you know,
I'm not even there yet.
Yeah, but we've been talking about it and stuff like that, you know. It's like, man, like, this is something you got to brace yourself. It's like, it's now or never kind of situation, you know. So I'd say that's how I would define it now, man. Like, it's very different than when I was younger, you know. But I'm glad that it changed because, like, if I think I would have stuck with the notion that if I never play with this artist, I would have been disappointed in myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like, you don't need to do and achieve these tremendous accolades to technically make it in music. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with wanting to play with your favorite artists.
For sure.
And things like that. You know, I think, you know, especially for me, when you're out on the road, you know, 3, 4, 6 months, sometimes 11 months out of the year, and you know, you barely get to see, or you don't even get to see your family, you don't get to see your friends, you know, and we will talk about the importance of the hang, you know, which is, you know, the group of people that you're on tour with. Sometimes you're on a tour bus, you know, 12 bunks, and you're living in close quarters. You know, it's pretty important to get along with, you know, those people that you're basically spending so much time with. Yeah. You know, and it's one of those things where there's some sacrifices. Yeah. You know, and there's some sacrifices that you have to make, you know, to chase after these dreams and these goals. You know, and it all comes at some sort of an expense. Sure. You know, in chasing your goals and successes so far in life, what kind of sacrifices have you had to make that, you know, say someone, you know, you grew up with from, you know, middle school or high school didn't necessarily have to go through to reach their goals and their successes? Yeah.
I think a lot of that centers around missing life events with family. To me, I love my family. My dad, you know, many don't know the story, but he passed away, you know, about 5 years ago. And so, you know, he's not around. So for me, my having my mom still around is one of the most important things. You know, so when I miss events, I remember, man, there was this gig that came up 2 years ago, and it was my grandma. I think it was my grandma's 84th birthday. And I remember that I regret it now because I chose the gig over seeing my grandma for her birthday. All because I was trying to pay off certain things, you know, at the time. And I was like, man, this interest is kicking my butt. If I do this gig, I'll be able to fully pay it off. And so I ended up choosing to do that gig at the expense of not being there for my grandma's birthday. You know, and I remember I was upset at myself. You know, I did the gig. It was great. You know, music was cool. But then I got home and I was like, man, my whole family was here. Some of the family that I only get to see once a year came by, and I didn't get to hang out with them. Yeah. You know, and so for me, sacrificing my family at that time was extremely difficult. But I know that unfortunately it's not even going to be the last time that something like that happens. Sure. Yeah. You know, especially doing music. You know, where I am in and out sometimes. It's difficult. I guess it's trying to determine when those opportunities, you know, present themselves. how you go about it. But family is the most important thing to me. So sacrificing that sometimes is very challenging, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with her, too, especially when you're coming up, you try to take every gig that you can. And one of the things that's hard about this is the inconsistency, the instability. And really, and if you haven't heard this before, like this industry is feast or famine. It isn't a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 where you clock in. The reality is, sometimes you're on the road literally for 60, 90 days straight, then there's nothing for the next 9 months. And so it's really difficult because, when you're thinking about, do I take this gig or not?
Yeah.
It's not something where, oh yeah, well, I know in 2 weeks from now, I'm going to be okay because, I have, Thursday to Sunday booked or whatever. You really don't know when the next gig is coming.
Yeah.
And so when it comes, it's almost like you want to take it.
Yeah.
And as soon as you book it, you realize, oh man, yeah, well, I'm going to miss my niece's 3rd birthday party. Especially for a lot of, local musicians and the gigging musicians. Oh, I'm going to miss Christmas because I'm doing a gig.
Yeah.
I'm also going to miss, this New Year's because I'm doing a gig.
Yeah.
And, those things where a lot of events is centered around
Sure.
Entertainment, we're working.
Yeah.
And so, we don't get to weddings. I've missed so many weddings that, that I obviously regret because those are some of my closest friends and things like that. But it's either I was out and I couldn't make it, or I literally didn't have money because I was in famine mode.
Wow, man.
And, like you said, there's so many things to take care of financially that's not on a consistent schedule.
Yeah.
So it's really hard and it's really tough to weigh, do I take this gig or not?
Yeah.
And for a lot of musicians, the touring life is it. And, when they're on tour, they're living life, everything's paid for. It's fantastic. They get the rates and all that. But, I would say, especially during COVID, a lot of people got hit really hard because the whole industry was shut down. And so for 2.5, 3, and we're still recovering. Like, make no mistake, like, it is not back. The top 1% of 1% are working. But, I know a lot of friends, and I'm sure you do too, who have left the industry.
Oh, yeah. And they left California. Yeah, a lot of them left California. They just couldn't do it anymore.
Because there hasn't been anything. And I feel like there's not a lot of people talking about that. We're super grateful that we still get to work. And, we've had to pivot as well. And,
sure.
We got to spend a lot of family time, but we've also had to be like, well, what do we do now? Unemployment's running out. Where are we going to get the next check?
Yeah.
Things like that. These are some of the sacrifices that you may not always get to see because you probably see, whatever that successful musician posts
whatever
on
they
Instagram.
Want you to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, here I am, and I'm in New York City. I'm doing the Grammys. I'm doing the Emmys. That happens once a year. What happens the other times?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, learning how to deal with that, the instability, those kinds of sacrifices can take a pretty huge toll on you, not just, emotionally, but mentally.
Yeah.
What are some things that you think could help, in trying to weather those kinds of things and those kinds of storms?
You know what? Before we continue, man, I did want to mention this because this is something that a lot of people may not consider when they're touring. If you're gone, let's say, at most 2-3 months, right? Mm-hmm. When you come back home, a lot of the people that you were playing with, the corporate agencies, they move on.
Right.
And they're going to find whoever's available next. Sometimes they're better than you. They have an extra thing that they like about them. And then it's like, there goes that job that you thought was so consistent, but you chose this opportunity, which by all means, if you get it, it's awesome. It's amazing. But you have to weigh. And it's really difficult. You have to consider, is this going to be a long-term gig? Am I only going to tour for these 2 months and then I'm done for the rest of the year? And if so, I hope you're getting a decent rate, so that if you aren't working for the next 4 or 5 months, whatever it might be, it's at least, the amount that it can take to cover those expenses. If you have a home, a mortgage, your car bill, because that stuff doesn't stop. You're on the road, but you still got to pay your phone bill. You still got to pay your insurance, your car bill, and it's like, man, I'm not even home. Why am I paying for an apartment? Why am I, it sucks, but that's, it's a part of the journey of doing music. But I would say that, man, like it's something to consider too. When you get those opportunities, it's like, man, hopefully this is still here when I come back, and hopefully those are people that you've created decent relationships with to be able to continue working with them, because if it's just a regular agency that you barely know the owner, I guarantee you, man, they move on, and they probably won't hit you up for months until the other drummer that they chose over you isn't available again. And it's like, oh yeah, there's this guy that I used to call.
Right.
Is he home though?
Right. So not to sound too negative,
Yeah.
but I mean, I think it's great for our viewers to really understand the inner workings of, that it's not all highs and what you see on social media and things like that. There's so many sacrifices, missed life events, things that we have to do, but it's because we love this.
Yeah.
And because of that, what would you say, is this, what do you get out of this? Why you're doing this, this sense of fulfillment? Can you describe what that's like?
Recently, this has been happening. We've been playing at Downtown Disney, and there was this family that came. There was this young, young boy that I saw in the crowd with the dad was holding him up, on his shoulders.
Yeah.
And I remember he moved from the front of the stage to the side of the stage, closer to where the drums are, right? And I saw the kid kept looking at the drums and my sticks, and I was like, you know what? Like, let me see if I can find a gap or somewhere in between here and maybe on a break, and let me just give him some sticks, whatever. I got up from the drums, grabbed a pair of sticks from my bag. I went to the dad and I gave the dad a pair of sticks. I said, go ahead and give it to your son. And he's like, no. He's like, we can't accept this or whatever. Long story short, this couple was visiting from Australia. And he was telling me, you don't know how happy you made my son feel. You don't know how happy you made. He's only 7 years old, which, mind you, that's about the age that I started. And he was telling me, he just started drums, but he's learning how to read. He's like, but he's just fascinated at the way that you're playing. And for me, it's like it's been happening multiple times. I'm now teaching on the side to a couple of students. And man, I find it so fulfilling, man, to be able to see just the excitement, the pure joy that kids have when they see you play. That's been extremely fulfilling for me as of late. Before, it was definitely like, man, like, people would compliment my playing or whatever. And I'm always thankful for that. And, that's for me, I believe, I'm a Christian. So, I believe it's a God-given talent. I've worked at it. Obviously, it's not something that I woke up playing, but it's something that I attribute a lot of the success to him. Without him, I wouldn't be doing this. But I'd say as of late, having these little young kids, man, look at you like you're their idol. It's just like, man, this is why we play. This is why we create this type of music, this sound to, bring people happiness and joy, because you don't know what they're going through, man.
Right.
What about you? What's fulfilling for you?
It's similar, if I could summarize you, I think it's just living for more than just yourself, living for larger than yourself. I think back to success and goals, and in the beginning, it was pretty selfish, and not that it's a bad thing, but I want to do this. There's some things I want to, check off my list. But I remember a specific moment, and I was actually halfway across the world in Guam, and I've never been to Guam. And I just remember after the show, there was this meet and greet, and there was this kid, who came up to me after the show, and he said two things. He said, because at that time I was touring with an artist, and I was also touring with a Christian artist. And he said, wow, it's really cool that you could play for Jesus and play for a secular artist.
Wow.
And I was like,
that's good, man.
Wow, I never thought about that way. And then he went on to say, he's like, thank you so much for coming to Guam and for being here. I've listened to you for years. And I was like, really? Like, how? And basically he said that I was the reason why he picked up the bass.
Oh, man.
And, this was also like a young kid, probably freshman in high school or something. And that's when I realized, I'm like, you don't know the kind of impact you're making just by pursuing what you feel is right. You know, what you feel is your purpose and passion in life. And, we always talk about, how, you got to figure it out. And it takes all these, years and whatever and experiences. But at the end of the day, if what you do is what you love, it's gonna find a way to be bigger than just you, bigger than just living for yourself. And for me, that's what makes all these sacrifices just worth it. Is understanding that yes, it's what I love to do, it's what gives me joy, it's what I'm good at. but ultimately it's actually also hopefully helping somebody else,
Yeah.
inspiring somebody else.
Definitely.
You know, and hopefully it gives them that confidence to go and pursue it too, so they can live in their purpose and their passion and get that kind of joy.
That's good, man. Well, guys, thank you for checking out episode 2 of the Chad and Chong podcast. Make sure to tune in episode 3. We are doing these every week. Subscribe if you haven't already, or if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, make sure you follow. And thank you guys for the support.